Hello class. In this presentation, we'll look at how to analyze or dissect a research article. And in this particular section, we will focus on the introductory information. This includes background information, question, and hypothesis. So basically, when you're presenting or writing a report on this research article, you have to provide the background information that led up to the studies. So let's look at several examples of introductory information. In general, a good way to identify the question is to look for words of uncertainty. So sometimes they might say, however, we don't know, or they might say something is not clear. So it tells you that it is something they still have a question about. Generally, the hypothesis is provided somewhere after these words of uncertainty, and normally you see words of purpose to give you an idea of what the hypothesis is. So for example, they might say, we wanted to determine whether A, B, and C. So the fact they want to determine tells you that it leads to the hypothesis. Now, sometimes the article might clearly state our question is, or it might clearly state we hypothesized, but it's not always that easy to find. So for this article and all article in general, this information will be found in the introductory section. And I generally recommend that before you look for these things, look at the title of the article. It gives you an idea as to what the question, the hypothesis, and even the background information is about that particular study. So let's go into the introduction and see if we can find words of uncertainty that can lead us to the question of the article. So I'm doing a quick scan. I'm not trying to read. I'm looking for words of uncertainty. Words of uncertainty. Okay, here I see one. It says here, while it is obvious that this particular species of ants gain both food and nesting space from this association, meaning the association with these ants and this particular carnivorous plants called pitcher plants, they said that the benefits for N. bicalcarata, which is the pitcher plant, have been less clear. So basically, this plant and the ants, they have a relationship. The ants live on the plant and they gain both food and a place to live. But it was not clear how the plant was benefiting from these ants. And these plants are actually carnivorous plants. So you could say the question, a general question could be, how does C. schmidti ants benefit N. bicalcarata pitcher plants? That could be the question, right? And then if I scroll down, I'm trying to look for words of certainty. Okay. So if we scroll down, what do they want to determine? In this last paragraph, just before the materials and method, but still in the introduction, they say, here we investigate whether natural contamination of the peristome, meaning the top or the mouth of the carnivorous plant, reduces the trapping efficiency of the N. bicalcarata plant, and whether the presence of the ants prevents or slows down this loss of efficiency. So if I look at this, remember the question was, how does C. schmidti ants benefit N. bicalcarata pitcher plants? So then the hypothesis, if I look at what is saying here, is that C. schmidti ants, or the presence of C. schmidti ants, right, slows down the loss of trapping efficiency, or we could say it increases the trapping efficiency of N. bicalcarata pitcher plants. So that could be the hypothesis. Let's look at another article. Okay. Let me go to this one. So in this article, we can see it's about three things. Some kind of parasite called Leucochloridium sporocyst, some type of host that this parasite parasitize, and the host are snails. And we want to determine manipulation. Does this thing manipulate? Now, this article is awesome because the title of the article is what? It's a question. So it actually tells you what the question is. Does Leucochloridium sporocyte manipulate the behavior of the snail host? What's the hypothesis? So at this point, you can create your own hypothesis, or you can look for one based upon what the authors have in the introduction. So I can hypothesize that Leucochloridium sporocyst manipulate the behavior of the snail host. But how do they manipulate them? So if we go down to the introduction, okay, so if we go down to the introduction, we can find, one second, maybe just above the method, oh, right here. So it says to learn whether Leucochloridium manipulates the behavior of its Succinia host. That's the question, right? Does Leucochloridium manipulate the behavior of its host? It says they compare the behavior of infected and non-infected snails to look to see if their behavior was modified. What kind of modification were they looking for? If I go right above it, it says that previous studies suggest that the parasite caused the snails to look for well-lit or open or exposed places where they become more visible to predators. So basically, these parasites want the snails to be eaten, so the parasites can then end up in those predators as part of its life cycle. So we have the question, what's the hypothesis? Leucochloridium causes Succinia host to go to the upper side of leaves where they are more exposed and visible to predators. That can be the hypothesis, right? Let's look at a different article. This one, if you look at the title, it's about COVID-19 lockdown. They're comparing the United States and China, and they're seeing if the air quality has changed. So we have an idea what it is about. What's the question they're asking? So if I go down into the introduction, this paragraph says here, since COVID-19 is an acute respiratory disease and could remain in the aerosol for hours, or in the air for hours, the main objective was to investigate the effect of reduced human activities and lockdown on environmental indicators, basically pollutants in the air, and changes in air quality between the United States and China. So we have an idea. So the question could be, right, how did the lockdown affect the air quality, right, in the United States and China? That is it. How did COVID-19 lockdown affect the air quality in the United States and China? And the hypothesis, you can take your stance. So the fact they said that aerosols can be in the air for a long time, right, and that you have that for hours, and that you had that lockdown, then I could hypothesize that what they're trying to find out is that, or let me state the hypothesis, during the COVID-19 lockdown, there was an increase in environmental pollutants and therefore an increase in air quality in the United States and China during that time. That could be the hypothesis, right? Let's look at one more, and then we will move on to the background information. So in this article, if you look at the title, it's about high viscosity, it's about blood pressure, and it's about patients that are prehypertensive or mildly hypertensive, which means they have the borderline high blood pressure. So let's look to see what could be the question and the hypothesis. So in the intro, And if you notice, normally it's right before the materials and methods. So in that paragraph, it says that one of the most common ingredients in commercial herbal tea blends is hibiscus sabdarifer. And then they said here that in vitro studies in animal models have shown it to be effective against hypertension. And then they said that concentrated H-sabdarifer beverages lowers blood pressure. But in the study, they want to determine whether consuming the tea in amongst readily incorporated into the diet, which means not concentrated, but the typical amount that is in the tea, right? How would that affect the blood pressure? So the question could be, how does normal levels of hibiscus tea or of hibiscus or H-sabdarifer affect the blood pressure of prehypertensive and mildly hypertensive patients? That could be the question. And then the hypothesis, although not clearly stated, you can take a stance. You could say that normal concentration of H-sabdarifer lowers blood pressure of prehypertensive and hypertensive patients. It's just a stance or a potential answer to the question, and that is it. The last thing that you need to know for the introductory information is background information. So when you are analyzing an article or presenting it either as a paper or a PowerPoint to an audience, you have to provide background information. Because, for example, maybe no one knows about what is hypertension. Nobody knows what's hibiscus sabdarifer, and nobody might know that people like to use plant-based products as potential medical treatments, right? So in the introduction, and normally the first paragraph of the introduction, a general information you might want to include when you do a write-up, a report, or a presentation. So for example, they say here that studies have shown that diets high in plant foods can lower risk of chronic diseases. Okay, that's good to know. Because what's the whole point of this paper? How does a particular plant food, hibiscus sabdarifer, affect some kind of disease? High blood pressure, right? And then you might mention, they say that, it's one of the most common ingredients found in commercial herbal tea blends. That's a good information for your class to know. Include that. If they don't know what hypertension is, describe what it is to the class. So this is background information you want to provide, and these are normally found in the introduction. Let's look at one more. So let's look at the one with the snail. Let's go to the background. So we talk about the snail. It manipulates some snail. Sorry, we talk about a parasite that manipulates the snail so that the snail can become more visible to predators and therefore are eaten. And that way the parasite gets moved to a next host, right? That's the whole point of this. So what should you tell your audience? So let's look at that first sentence. It says, it is true that an animal with a parasite is not likely to behave like a similar animal without that parasite, right? Okay, that's kind of good to know that some animals, when they have parasitic infections, their behavior might change. That's good to know, right? Here they say when the parasite-induced behavioral change benefit the parasite, they are described as manipulative. That's kind of good to know. We're introducing that whole concept of manipulation, right? Then here they talk about leucochloridium. Okay, we're going to talk about this parasite. What does it do? What does it do? Sorry. It invades the tentacles of snails. That's good to know because we're going to see it's going to manipulate the tentacles, right? And then we need to know about the snail, information about the snail. So look in that background and pull out this information to provide in your written report or your presentation. Okay. So we've discussed the three main things that you can find in the introduction of a paper, which you can use when analyzing or when doing your research article dissection. Thank you.